Hello, I'm Dr. Janeane Walker, Director of Faculty Development and Educational Outcomes for our Graduate Medical Education Program here at Northeast Georgia Medical Center. Thank you so much for joining us for our Faculty Development Podcast. Today, we are going to talk about the landscape of healthcare, burnout and work-life integration, and imposter syndrome. So I'm joined by two awesome guests, and I'm going to have them just introduce themselves.
Hi, I'm Dr. Devin Vicknair, and I'm the Director of Behavioral Health for Graduate Medical Education for Family Medicine, and I'm Adjunct with Psychiatry as well.
Thank you.
Hi, I am Holly Stewart. I'm the Director of Educational Support and Wellbeing for our Graduate Medical Education Department, and I also serve as adjunct faculty on the Family Medicine and Psychiatry teams.
Well, thank you both for joining me today. I do have an opening question for you both, and I'll just go ahead and read it. It says, as we dive into the complex landscape of healthcare and faculty well-being, could you each share a personal story or experience that highlights why this conversation about well-being is so crucial for those in medical education today?
I think it's really important to consider this in a lot of different angles. Just even the first thing that came to mind as I was working with a patient this morning that's in healthcare, and realize how people got into this field to because they love and they care and they want to do a great job and have an impact. And I believe that's what happens with medical students as well. They get into this field and then it gets big, it gets fast, there's a lot involved, and it's easy to get drained if they're not doing the right things to take care of themselves. And I mean, I say the right things, but there's probably not one perfect thing. But it can lead to a lot of burnout, and before you know it, the person starts to lose interest in what they were very passionate about. And the organizations nowadays, I mean, they have to have employees. So if the person is no longer performing or doing well or taking care of themselves, they have to find somebody that is able to do those things. So I think it just reiterates the importance of making sure that you're best prepared and you're doing things to maintain your own well-being despite any job you have, let alone in healthcare where you're going to be providing care for others.
Holly?
Yeah, when thinking about this topic as it applies to faculty, I can't really think of a specific story to share, but just general observations that faculty are prone to burnout from a lot of different angles. I think, first they have their own clinical duties that they have to attend to, right? They have to take care of their patients. But when they're teaching residents and fellows, there's also this educational obligation. A lot of them are carrying worries for residents who might be struggling. They're human. They're wondering, am I doing the right thing? Am I serving my residents well? I think that can just really add up when you have that added responsibility of training up the next generation of physicians on top of, your own clinical responsibilities. It's a lot.
Thank you. Either of you can answer this particular question. What are effective ways for faculty to maintain being empathetic and compassionate in a demanding profession?
Oh gosh, that is so hard to answer, really. I mean, I think part of it is the personality of the individual getting in the field. That I hope that is a prerequisite of having empathy and compassion, and then you just try to hold on to it and build it. And I think maintaining it might be just maybe looking back as to why a person chose this field in the first place and be reminded of that. And then even as the day goes on, or providing care for others and teaching, to realize why you got into this field, and then the wins. While there's struggles and there's some stress, there's also some wins, and you get to go on that journey with individuals, whether it's the patients or the student or other faculty members. And I think tuning into that and feeling that reward should hopefully offset some of the other stressors that may test empathy or compassion or even passion in the field.
I kind of look at this from the angle of the resident or the fellow, like how as faculty can they remain compassionate and empathetic towards them as educators. I give this advice to residents all the time. If you received feedback in a way that didn't feel good, or if you were treated a way that didn't feel so good, use that to help yourself, and in the future know that that's how you don't want to be. And so I think about faculty treating a resident as they would want to have been treated. Remember that they're struggling. A lot of times this is new. They have knowledge gaps. They have, they're working a lot of long hours. They are, it's just a really trying time of their lives. So I, encourage faculty to kind of think about, remember when you were a resident and, dealing with those same things.
And Holly, I think one time we spoke about this concept of self-improvement. So my next question is, what steps can be taken beyond self-care to address systemic issues contributing to stress in healthcare?
I think the first thing that's really, really important to remember is that burnout is not a lack of resilience. It doesn't mean that you aren't capable or strong. It is an occupational phenomenon. It is something that's caused by exposure to long-term job stress. So I think that the first thing is we need to reframe burnout and not look at it as a personal failing, but look at it as people being human and not being able to sustain exposure to long-term stressors like that. They can't be in this activated state for an indefinite period of time without suffering from it. So I think that is the first step, in my opinion.
And Dr. Vicknair, how can we shift the focus from individual self-improvement to systemic changes that support faculty well-being?
Well, I think even going back to the time, the energy that goes into this, there's a saying by Viktor Frankl, and he says, what provides light endures burning, or something to that effect. So it does require energy to do this, and it does fall on the individual quite a bit, but it's not the individual's sole responsibility to rebuild and to kind of keep that flame lit. And I think of it almost like if you're running a race, if it's a 5K or a marathon, you're not going to stop the race and go to the side and go to a grocery store and buy water and then get back into the race and keep going.
Right.
The race sets up stations along the way to be minimal inconvenience, if anything, is to keep you going while you're running. And I think as a system, if we can meet the staff where they are and provide for them as they're performing their duty, as they're going along the journey and the task, that can be really helpful. In addition to each runner being conditioned for it and doing what they need to do to prepare and take care of the individual.
And go ahead. You want to say
Well,
something?
I was just going to add, along those lines, I think, practically we can look at ways. It doesn't have to be this huge systemic change. We can look at small ways. What are the small annoyances every day that get in people's way and make their lives just a little bit harder? And when you have multiple instances of this, it really can contribute to burnout. So what are the small things that we can do? What, bureaucratic processes can we eliminate or minimize to make lives a little bit easier? Do we really need this meeting? And in this meeting, if we do need it, can we make it really efficient so that it maximizes people's time and it has value added to it? So I think some of that is just practically rethinking some of the small, I call it like death by 1,000 cuts. How can we eliminate some of the cuts that are, bogging people down during their day?
Excellent. Can either of you share some of the work that you're currently working on regarding faculty well-being?
I try to incorporate into our clinic anything that has to do with themes. So, for example, for Mental Health Awareness Month, brought in bracelets, green tea, coffee one day, just things to provide for them, just to remind them and invite them to recognize the topic, so learn a little bit along the way, and then enjoy something for free that is good, that can be a break in the day. It's a little bit different. As well as just having an open door, because the nature of behavioral health is it's really 24/7. It's up to us to shut the door or stop the clock. But I always keep my door open. So when people have something that they need to vent, whether it's faculty or staff or residents, that they can sit down and I'll listen. And sometimes just having another human being be present and witness your experience has a lot of value. It's not trying to solve a problem. But just sharing an experience. And then also, if there's resources, be able to guide them in that direction as well.
And Holly, what about some of your work that you've been doing?
Sure. So I have the privilege of being able to work with the family medicine faculty and quarterly come in and do just kind of wellness rounds with them. And, every time I go into this, I'm always a little bit nervous because, I think going in and trying to solve burnout it's impossible, right? That's just not something that any of us are going to be able to do on our own. So I always go in feeling a little bit, responsible for fixing whatever problem there is. But then when I get in there, I might have a prompt or two, and it might even be something simple like, how are you doing? What's going on? Tell me, what's something that's kind of on everyone's mind right now. And just having that forum for them to discuss, the work sort of does itself a little bit. It's just really creating that space and that time and being intentional about bringing forth some of these, issues that everyone might be dealing with, and not realizing that they're not alone in this, that they, when they hear each other speak, they're like, oh, you know what, I'm dealing with the same thing. It feels so good to not be the only one. I thought I was alone in that. So I think that's one way, is just really creating a forum for people to be able to share and socialize a little bit and talk and kind of understand each other a little better.
Well, and I think that goes back to the systemic kind of approach to it. I mean, even having that opportunity to have somebody in, or using faculty development time just to have a break, and to be able to talk about things. And we even have a book club that we're doing amongst faculty, and the one that we're doing now, it's always about growth and development, but this was called the Doctor's Dozen. And it's really about self-care, but how you can learn from patients and each other different lessons in life that leads to patient care, but our own care as well. So I think that different kind of organized activities like that are helpful as well.
So I have a question for you both that's not in my notes, but as you were talking, it just came to me. You both have open door policies. I see your offices are always open, constant influx into your room. How do you manage your own personal self-care, well-being, mental wellness? Because there's times Holly's not even in her office and I'll see a resident pass by and I'll text her, hey, there's someone here. And I'm thinking, but suppose she's having lunch.
Right.
How do you, I know it's not on my notes, sorry.
No, I think it's a great question.
It's a great question.
But how do you manage it? It's always been a question I always wanted to ask.
It's perfect.
I think for me, being in roles like we have, it's a little bit tricky to set boundaries because part of the expectation is to be available to people. We are the wellness people. And so there is a little bit of an expectation to be self-sacrificial to be able to help other people. But I've learned through going through some of my own burnout to be, transparent, you have to have boundaries in place, and you have to kind of learn to triage what is truly an emergency. What do I need to kind of stop in my tracks and say, okay, I have to go address this or work with this person, and what can maybe wait until the next day. And so learning how to assess that was big for me. If a resident or a faculty is, in crisis, they're really upset, of course I'm going to stop and, talk with them or help them however I can. But if it's more of a complaint or more of a, hey, the coffee machine is broken, we can talk about that tomorrow. So, right. So I think kind of putting some of those boundaries in place for myself. And then also honoring that I'm human. And sometimes I need to come home after a day of just being on. And maybe I just sort of sit there and zone out for a little bit. I mean, you know what I mean? Or play a game, watch a show, do something a little bit mindless to give myself that mental break. And then, okay, I'm ready to, move on to whatever it is I have to do that evening. So, and then sleeping, I think sleep is so huge. We preach this to the residents and faculty, but aren't always the greatest practitioners of it. We talk about this a lot because we both, have
especially during the Olympics. I didn't go to sleep. So really late.
So protecting your sleep is so important for your brain health, for your emotional health, kind of managing your own reactions to things during the day. So making sure I go to bed, by a certain hour so that I'm fresh and rested for the next day has been huge, especially if you're a natural night owl. Yeah.
And I think all of those points, I like to practice what I preach. Not perfectly. I don't all the time. But I try to keep in mind that that those 4 ingredients for well-being: physical, psychological, spiritual, and social. And so I have those built into my day most days. There are days that sleep just doesn't happen. So, but things come up. But I've learned that I have to start the day with me and try to have like a reserve of fuel, because I know it's going to be taxed as the day goes on. So I start. I wake up a little bit earlier. I have to have coffee. So that's my drug of choice is coffee. But while I drink coffee, I do a devotion and I do a journal, and I do breakfast during that time, and then I exercise. So I exercise before. And I say that a lot of this happens so early in the morning. I wake up at 5 to do this, and I don't consider myself a morning person. And I've been doing this for decades. But I had to do it because it was the only time I had, being a dad, being a student, being fully employed. So I do those things. I exercise, and then I've done all of that before I hit the road after 6 o'clock. And if someone said you had to do all these things in the first thing in the morning, I was like, I don't have time. I don't have energy, but I do. And I can't say I'm rushed, but I get it done. Sometimes I think I'm sleeping through my exercise, but I get it done. I can check it off. My watch says I've done it. But that's what I do before I care for others. And I feel like that's a requirement to fill my tank so I can provide fuel throughout the day. And there's some days you get home and it's like I have nothing else to give, right? And it's like I just need to sit in the driveway for 5 minutes and breathe. Because I know once I go into the house, that's a different mindset. And I take my phone out as kind of a boundary, and I put it in the kitchen so I'm not seeing it. And I try to stay away from alerts as much as possible. And I separate my email, my work email, from my private email. That's new, and it's incredible because I don't know how to integrate them, which I don't want to learn now. So to me, that was a great boundary. It seems simple. And then my wife kind of has this thing like, change your clothes. Like, get out of your work clothes, get in this. And then even once a week, and this started way back when because I was studying and working, on Wednesday night, it's like our pizza night. So Wednesday night is pizza night at our house. So nobody cooks, nobody's working, we watch TV or a movie or just be, I really look forward to that. Even if it's not pizza, it's Chinese food or something like that. But to me, I have to kind of integrate those things into the day or the week so that I'm not fully depleted and not quick to burn out. I've been burnt out multiple times, but mainly because I get away from things that are working and I have to be reminded to get back on track.
So speaking of burnout and work-life integration, so this is a great segue into the next question for our faculty. What are the early signs of burnout and what steps can be taken to address it?
Well, so burnout, if we're looking at it, from the actual clinical definition of it, and burnout actually is recognized as a condition. It's classified in the ICD-10, so it can be diagnosed. And typically it's 3 components. So emotional exhaustion, depersonalization, so kind of feeling like, your patients are just, it's just a case. It's just a thing I have to do rather than a human being. And then feelings of kind of detachment, like I'm just a cog in a wheel. I'm not really making a difference. So this decline in a feeling of efficacy, like I'm doing anything at all. I think apathy is a big thing. Like when you see people who used to be very passionate or excited about their job and really have this fire, when you see that start to kind of die down and it become more of a whatever, I just got to get this done, kind of showing up, going through the motions, but maybe not really putting their heart and soul into it. And I think, we all experience that to some degree. We're all human. And there are days when any of us is going to show up and be like, okay, I'm just having a rough day or whatever. But I think when it's constant and when it becomes the norm and not the exception is when maybe people need to consider if they might be getting burnt out.
And I think as you're saying that too, it reminds me that it's not just work related. Like you could get burned out at home, you can get burned out at work, you can get burnt out, period. And it doesn't just happen at work, and it doesn't just impact work. I mean, I think you could go home and just be like, you're asked a question, you're like, I can't make any more decisions. I have nothing left to give. Or you could go to the grocery store and just like, I don't want to deal with people, right? I mean, it can affect people in all kinds of environments. It's not unique to work. But what we know about in healthcare is it can be detrimental to decision making and lives are on the line. So not only is the individual affected, but their ability to make decisions. So you might see a provider ordering more tests because they're not thinking clearly or uncertain, or they just don't want to use the brain power. Maybe they just have nothing to give. But and so there's a greater chance of errors and maybe extra tests that But it doesn't necessarily just uniquely happen in one environment.
So with that said, how can institutions better support faculty in managing burnout and achieving healthy work-life balance or integration? Is there something that we can do from an organization issues type?
I think listening to what people are saying, and I know that sounds simplistic, but I think when people say, hey, wouldn't it be nice if we could do this thing? And people are like, oh, yeah, that'd be great. Like, that's pie in the sky, whatever. But I think people should stop and listen to what people are saying. Take time to actually survey people. What are the issues you're encountering in your job or your department, or what is making an impact? And I know we do those things like through our employee engagement survey. We have different satisfaction surveys, but I'm really talking more on a granular level, like either sitting down with your staff or sending out some sort of online survey. What are the barriers for you? What's if you what are your stressors that you encounter on a daily basis? How can we help make that better? So just being open to feedback and listening. And not just in a checkbox way, but in a, I really want to hear and hopefully put some things in place that are going to help.
And I think putting things into place and listening has extreme value. I mean, and there may be some things that you can't do anything about it, but just acknowledging where the person is, acknowledging those things exist has a lot of value. And meeting people where they are. And hopefully having a close enough relationship where you can have those talks. I worked at a place previously, and I remember my boss calling me out. She's like, Dr. Vicknair, you seem a little crispy. And I'm like, what does that mean? And probably evasive. I was like, what? But she's like, even the way you're talking about patients doesn't seem like you normally would. And so unfortunately, the way it was dealt with, I had more work to do. I had to read books. I had to take some time off. And it felt like punishment. It was a lot of value. So there was benefit to that. But I think meeting people where they are and addressing it for what it is, that it can happen and we can work on it like anything else.
Before we move on to imposter syndrome, I have one last question for this particular segment. What strategies are effective for maintaining work-life integration? Are there any strategies that we can share with the faculty today so that they'll know, as we're talking about, burnout, well-being, as we're talking about this changing of healthcare and the way our environment currently is, what strategies are effective for maintaining work-life integration?
That's $1 million question.
It is $1 million question.
We all will be rich and we can retire.
Right, yeah,
we should share it with the faculty.
This is going to go viral.
We'll go viral after today.
So I remember actually you gave a lecture on this several years ago, and what I took from it was kind of knowing yourself and how you work best. For instance, with myself, I prefer not to be the type of person who's working all day long. Like if I'm at my kid's volleyball game, I don't really want to be returning email because that stresses me out. But for some people, it may make their day more manageable when they can kind of work on the go and switch gears. So I think it, kind of knowing yourself is a huge part of this whole equation is, what makes sense for you and what does or doesn't stress you out? Does it make your day lighter if you kind of work on things throughout the day, or if you have pajama time at night where you're finishing up notes or whatever in bed? I mean, some people that might actually work for them. So I think it's a little difficult to say, you know, this is the solution, because everyone's lives are different. You just kind of have to figure out what does or doesn't work for you.
That's a great point. And people may roll their eyes at this, but I love what I do. And so some of the work-life integration I enjoy. So if I do decide on a Saturday night to check my email, it's because I'm excited or I'm looking for something, or maybe I'm bored and it excites me. So I know that's not everybody, and it's not me all the time. But I think it is individual to find what you enjoy and how you work best. And then even with that integration, I think not in the sense of multitasking, but I think you can do things. I'm a behaviorist, so I think that you can do things together and enjoy that process. So if I'm walking on a treadmill in the morning and I'm watching a 30-minute video on how to do a new technique or learning about a medication, I enjoy those things. So to me, that is kind of work-life integration. I may not be checking my email during that time, but I'm still preparing myself for others and my place of employment. And then there's times where you do just need to kind of practice more healthier boundaries, and it's not as much integration, it's more of a boundary or a line. But I hope people find enjoyment in what they choose to do, and it may mean career change or going back to school or whatever it takes. But I don't know, life's too short to not enjoy this. I mean, we spend a lot of hours doing this.
Right.
And if you don't like the people you're working with or the place that you're at, or if it's toxic or just a toxic setting, why would you do that for very long? I know, we got to pay bills, make money, but I mean, there's just so many other opportunities, and it may not be immediate, but I think looking for something while you have something is good too. I hope nobody leaves here because
we hope not. But any other strategies that you can think of effective for maintaining work-life integration? I feel like you've said it all throughout the podcast already, but if there's any other integrations that you think that are significant strategies for effective maintaining, work-life integration, especially for our faculty that are drawn in so many different directions and the responsibility that they have in medical education.
Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, I mean, these may be silly examples, but in working with faculty over the years and then kind of thinking about my own routines, I think having something after you get off work to wind down and maybe process and digest what happened during your day. So one faculty that we featured in our newsletter a couple of years ago, he would come home and immediately go sit down at his grand piano and play and kind of turn his brain off from this work mode, from this sort of decision-making, decision fatigue status to, calming, using this creative part of his brain. And I experience the same thing if I'm cooking. Randomly, I discovered this. I didn't realize I was doing it until one day I was like, wow, I just solved this whole problem at work while I was, cooking tacos or whatever. So I think giving yourself, especially even like a tactile activity after you get home off work, can actually really be helpful in kind of bringing you out of that like elevated limbic state to a calmer, kind of centered place. It's been helpful for me and others.
Excellent. Well, I want to thank you both for joining me for this podcast. The next podcast, we're going to focus in on imposter syndrome and resources for faculty.